Have you studied the Archons, Michael?
Yeah. Are you talking about in the sense that John Lamb Lash is speaking about?
Right. Yeah, the Gnostic parallels.
Yeah, his stuff is pretty generic. There's nothing, he hasn't added anything new. This is a very old subject, going back to the, some people call them cosmocrates, other people call them the daemons, But in my work, in my very first book on Atlantis, I deal with them. And I do believe they exist. It's a huge subject, and I've studied it for years, but it's always something you have to continue to read up on and unpack. It's so difficult to come to the bottom of what it means, because if you're familiar with Carl Jung, he would have taken it, he would have taken it and said, oh no, they're not physical beings by any means, they're just archetypes, or so everybody's got their own spin. But I actually believe they exist. I actually believe they exist pretty much in the way that the Gnostics originally intended them to be taken, and that is that there's some powers, that rule this world, rule this planet, rule consciousness. Whether they're created by our collective unconscious, that they're just sort of... Because there's one school of thought that believes that they're just projections of us, they're projections of everybody's consciousness, and then they're sort of, constellated. An average Archon is not independent of us. And then there's people who believe that they are, So it's just amazing. But you see, here's the thing why I kind of believe in them, and that is it likely that any human author or any human being, especially back in the pre-medieval times, is likely to come up with that concept? I don't think so. To come up with the idea of the Archons doesn't sound to me that that's some random, thing. To be so specific about it is pretty incredible. But again, that's lumped into... Academics just lump that into, that's just like the theory of Atlantis, or the theory of angels, or the theory of anything. They just lump it all as being mythology, especially in the Irish Celtic. That's just considered fairy folk tale, as most of the stuff is. But I've often said that the platform that we're on today, we can revisit a lot of this stuff, a lot of the symbolism which has been done, and a lot of this other Gnostic teachings, especially this concept of the Archons. I think there's a lot to it, and that we still yet don't understand. Now, earlier on, Matt was asking about the beings that you might be able to contact if you take some of the drugs. I don't know if Curtis, you heard that, but see, this all ties in together. Yeah, this all ties in together. That I think that some of those beings are aspects of one's higher self, but you can never know. There's a whole school of magic, there's a whole school of sorcery that also believes in taking drugs and doing rituals in order to directly contact these entities. I kind of took that concept and worked it into my Atlantis theory. Remember, I wrote about John Dee connecting with these microbes of a very high level, of a very, very high and very sinister level, in order to get hold of some keys that they needed back here on Earth. And I believe that this kind of sorcery, there's a question coming up later on I saw on the Conspiratorium about the nature of blood and the significance of blood, so the person who asked that question should perk up at this point, because that ritual has very much to do with energy, psychic energy, and even physical energy in the form of blood, but also in the form of cortisol and adrenaline, and the sucking of that, and also using the whole human race in some sort of slavery situation, a slave race. So this is a huge subject, and one only has, it's like having a tiger by the tail, But in the last part of the Atlantis book, and also in the last part of the Atlantis DVD, I did deal with these cosmocrates because I found some interesting anecdotes about them in the work of David Oveson, the guy who wrote the book The Symbolism of Our Nation's Capital. Anybody remember that book? It's not the symbolism of, but it's David Oveson, his first book.
The Way Washington Lay Down.
Yeah, that's the one. He wrote 2 books, but the first one, the name of it just... But I talk about that book quite a lot. I have a whole chapter on David Oveson's book, actually, in my Atlantis book. And in that is where I go into that, but also on the DVD. And the DVD is free, by the way, up on unslaved.com. So if you go to my website, Unslaved, click on Atlantis and kind of scroll towards almost the last hour, there's a good lot of stuff on the Cosmocrates and the Archons in that. Yeah, it's a very interesting subject. I just think that, there's Mana Blavatsky talked about it. So there's a lot of good work out there on it, yeah.
Did you want to follow up on that, Curtis?
I guess what you were saying about the macrobes in John D, and that's why a lot of the generals in the military, they wear the regalia, the olive branches, or all the maple leaves, and even the queen. I think a lot of these people that are decorated, I think they are just generals too, like the queen. These figureheads.
Yeah, you see the way the cities are laid out. One of the most important parts of the Archon, I did mention this stuff about the regalia one wears, but the biggest, to me, one of the most frightening, I mean, in a true, Quatermass way, is literally the design of our cities. The ritual, my friend Dan Tatman in Bath has looked around Bath, and he's come up with some interesting stuff there, and there's other scholars who've done it, and I get reams of stuff from people who picked up on my work years ago, and have been sending me stuff from Belgium. One guy sent me a lot of stuff from Belgium, which is absolutely frightening. And Brian Garish, although he obviously hasn't referred to my work, he doesn't know about my in-depth researches into this. In one of his latest interviews, I heard him talking about a place in Wales where there's these weird obelisks are turning up and weird designs, and I just wish that he knew more about my work. Because I unpack all of that. So there are a lot of other people starting to notice that something odd is going on. The Olympic Games that just happened, the other designs in London and elsewhere. All of this to me is tantamount to supporting this concept of the Archons, because if they're up there, so to speak, not physically up there, but sort of up there, presence is looking down. There's something interesting in just the simple geomancy that's involved in the city design, something ritualistic about it. And that's where my focus was from a child, actually, is going around and looking at the geomancy of these cities and wondering what the hell is going on here, And I really do believe there's some ritual aspects connected to that, and the positioning of buildings and stately homes and what have you. I really do believe that.
There's also a lot of, when you get into the churches and you get into the symbolism on churches, I mean, just even here in Toronto and a lot of the government buildings here, you can see it all over the place. So I'm sure some of the people sitting here will recognize that as well. So I just wanted to add that in there, getting into the religious aspect.
Some cities have labyrinths. I mean, right in churchyards in San Francisco they got one, and it all looks all great for tourists and what have you. But who the hell knows what is really going on? That costs millions of dollars to make that. And you wonder, in these stained glass windows with inverted pentagrams and the whole, and then the connections between these. There's a whole science of this, and then you pull back, and then suddenly you have this 33rd meridian grid line. You know about that. I featured in the Atlantis book from the works of Downard, that show that the 33rd meridian of the Earth is specifically important again to Masons, and a lot of the deeper Masonry is indeed to do with this geomancy, which then ties in, as Richard Hoagland and others have shown, into the astrotheology aspect of the alignment of the constellations during important inaugural events and all sorts of rituals. We've gone into this, the dates. So why all of that? See, if you don't believe in the Archons, then what's the purpose of doing all this celestial and geomantic alignment stuff? I don't get it. It has to be for some sort of supernatural, purpose. And it's not just a ritual. Oh, they're just doing it because it's ritual and holds themselves together. There's 1,001 rituals you can do in the lodge, which has nothing to do with making monuments 555 feet high and all sorts of other incredible sacred numbers being encoded into streets all over the world. It just seems to me a dead giveaway. Also the etymology of some of these places, Val, Moral, Westminster, all this, there seems to be symbolism in that as well. So there's the etymology, the numerology, and the geomancy, and we're cracking that. A lot of people have done some fantastic work on this, like David Ovison and others. Even Graham Hancock's book Talisman, very good book to get on this same subject. Now, but I think Curtis, If you don't have the book Talisman by Hancock and Beauval, you should get it, because I think he talks about the Archons in there as well. Not 100% sure, but it's a very good book to have anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that, Michael. And Curtis, we're going to bring on some other questions here. Did you have any final comments or anything before you take off?
Oh, I'm good, thanks. I'll sit back and enjoy the show.
Awesome.
Thanks for being part of it, Curtis. Thank you.
Thanks for calling in, man.
Very good question. Very good question, actually. That stuff opens a can of worms.
What do you want to do next, Patrick?
That Archon stuff really opens a can of worms.
Can I ask a question?